Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to see you here tonight. We appreciate you being here tonight. Wow, nice to hear you. I hope you're ready for some unindoctrination because, ready or not, here we come. We've got a great special guest tonight, Michelle Gibson. I'm going to let her introduce herself because invariably, if I do it, I'll say something that didn't need to be said, or I won't say something that did need to be said. So we're going to introduce Michelle in just a minute. Cynthia is a big fan of her work. I've had a chance to familiarize myself with her work today. She has several fans here in the chat room, and we're very glad to see all of you there. We want to say hello to our listeners on KYAH Radio. Those of you that have been listening to the Hal Turner program, I hope that you'll stick around. I think you'll hear something that you like. And tomorrow night, we'll be back into our regular time slot. Tonight, we're just from 10 to midnight Central Time because Hal does have a extra hour on Wednesdays, as you know. And then next Tuesday, we've got Glenn Streeter coming in for a great show, and we're going to talk about advanced medical prepping. Venus Latte is a huge fan of Michelle, so we're glad to have you here tonight, Venus. Tracy says it's a camo feel tonight. It is kind of a camo feel tonight, but we really appreciate you. And I know we've had some interesting shows the last couple of days. This will be a little bit of a break for us, a little bit of something that isn't quite so like the rest of the stuff has been. And yet, really, when you start thinking about this subject matter, it is huge and has tremendous implications for all of our lives. And it's one of those things that everybody knows a little bit about, but there's really, in my opinion, very few true experts. And I think tonight we do have a true expert in these areas, the areas of Tartaria, mud flood, orphan trains, and everything that goes with it. And tonight I hope to pretty much just stay out of the way, kind of give Michelle her room, ask a few questions. Go ahead, please. And if you have questions, throw them in the chat room. And we'll go ahead and open up the phone lines a little bit later as well and take some call-ins from Michelle. Just remember that we have just a couple of rules. You have to be polite, you have to be interesting, and you have to be short and right to the point. And it's not an invitation for you to call in and give your own show, but make a point, and we appreciate your participation. And we are on terrestrial radio. We're under FCC regulations, which means keep your language very clean, I hope. And we are on YouTube tonight, so the usual things we can't talk about on YouTube, we're not going to talk about on YouTube. Like Tracy says, no naughty words when you call. And remember the subjects that the comrade censors at YouTube don't want us to say. So we'll try to stay within those bounds as much as we can. If we have to, we can always drop off of YouTube and go to places that are more inclusive in their content. Let's just say that way. Well, folks, it's my pleasure tonight to have with me Michelle Gibson. She's an author. She has a great website. She is an exhaustive researcher, and I really appreciate her methodical, objective, empirical style of research. She's not big on sensationalism, and I think that is a real credit to her, and it's something that's definitely needed in our genre, and especially when it approaches and when we approach this type of a subject matter. It's very important that we do double cross our T's, double dot our I's, and make sure that we're talking about things that make sense. Because in our genre, we only get one chance to look ridiculous, and then we never get another chance. It's the old adage of you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. It's even more so within our genre. So I do have a deep appreciation for Michelle's methodical way of discussing things, and it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us here tonight, Michelle Gibson. And as we get started, I know people are going to want to know where to get your information, how to learn more about you. So if we can start, maybe you could introduce yourself to us, your work, and then tell us where people can find you.
Okay, I can do that, Jeff.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, thank you. Just a little bit about myself to start out with. I will be 58 next month. I was born in July of 1963 and raised outside of Washington, D.C. So I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is an affluent suburb of DC. There may have been some changes since I grew up there, from what I understand, but at the time, it's a good place to be from. And I currently reside in Sedona, Arizona, which I lived here since 2017. And it's been quite a journey to get here to talk to you tonight, which started a long time ago. I have been fascinated with megaliths my whole life, or at least as long as from the first time that I found out about them. And I loved watching shows like Unsolved Mysteries when I was growing up with Robert Stack. I liked In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. So I had a real interest in this off-topic kind of stuff back then, and there was very little available at the time. Thankfully for the internet, because I wouldn't be able to do the research that I do without it. And it's really been a blessing. I loved history also growing up. So I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. Is it?
I am too, and I can't find where it's coming from. I'm just barely hearing it. I don't know if any of the listeners are hearing it, but I hear just the faintest little echo. Is it bothersome to you? Is it that bad?
Noticeable.
Noticeable, okay. Let me go ahead and try to make a little adjustment over here and see if we can make it any better.
Yeah, it just started up a moment ago.
Right, okay, I think I know what I did. That should fix it right there. Is that any better?
Let's see. Yay. That
okay,
worked.
Perfect.
So I loved history in high school, junior high and high school. I was a voracious reader, read everything I could get my hands on, and took advanced placement history in high school. I'm glad I didn't major in it, because what I now understand is that it's probably not worth the paper that it's written on.
Absolutely.
But which is good, because I did major in social work and psychology in college, and that gave me a practical career, which I did for about 13 years, primarily in nursing homes as a social worker and activities director. And I say that because I think it left me open to receive the information that I have over the course of my life. And I've traveled a lot. I was in the Army from 1982 to 1986, which is how I got money for college. So I've traveled all over Europe, and I've lived in a lot of different places. And so I started breaking away from the programming a long time ago, because my life has just been so different, and I've always done things that people haven't expected of me in terms of life decisions. And it's just because of that, I wasn't programmed.
Absolutely. And let me thank Scott Bonner for a $10 tip over on Rockfin. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. It left me open to receive the information that I did. And I didn't really start waking up until the early 2000s. I was always aware of a lot of different things, and I started receiving the information a long time ago. So I feel like I've been picking up puzzle pieces my whole life. And the travel is part of that. I mean, things that I would notice and see when I was traveling in England and Germany and, different places. So I had the experience.
Now, were you awake, quote unquote, then when you were over in Europe?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
But I did get information that I needed.
Right.
To do the research that I'm doing today. So I was stationed in Augsburg, Germany. Between
I keep laughing because there's tremendous parallels between our lives. We'll discuss it when you're finished with your introduction.
So I was in Germany from 83 to 85. And I wasn't a barracks. I wasn't a barracks rat. I worked a shift where I worked the days off of the other 3 shifts. I was in military intelligence. It was called Rota. And so I worked 2 swings, 2 days, and 2 mids, and then I had, I believe it was 80 hours off. And so more often than not, I would just jump on the train on my days off.
You had a Eurail pass, didn't you?
I didn't, but I spent a lot of money on train tickets. I didn't get a car, but that's okay. So I was always curious. I wasn't afraid to travel. Knowing what I know now, I might have been more afraid then, but it didn't stop me. I wasn't fearful. And I traveled by myself a lot of times. I did travel with groups, but I traveled by myself. So I actually had the experience of being in these places. And just kind of a memory from that, the Augsburg Rathaus, which is the town hall, is very distinctive looking. And I think the entire time I was there, it was under, it was being, the front of it was being redone. But I have very powerful memories of sitting in the beer garden in front of it in Augsburg, and then seeing the same looking structure in Bradford, England, which is where my mother's family came from.
Fascinating.
Same style of architecture and everything. And so it was things like that that just helped me connect the dots, because I have been in a lot of different places, not only overseas, but in North America as well. I haven't been to Asia or India, but I have lived in a lot of places in the States, even spent some time in Nova Scotia. And, it's like my life's journey has been perfect for leading me along this path, and then having the ability to put things together when I really started to understand it. So it wasn't an overnight thing. It's been a long process, but I feel like I had everything I needed to know in order to start to put the puzzle together. And that first started happening when I was living in Oklahoma between 2012 and 2016. And I was pretty awake by 2012 to a lot of different things spiritually, not necessarily to the ancient civilization that I'm going to talk about, but I read Fingerprints of the Gods. I was living in Fairbanks, Alaska at the time. Robert Bauval and the Orion theory. A friend of mine had gotten all of the books of the president of the University of Alaska, Fairbanks.
Wow.
And he had some alternative history stuff in there. I'm starting to pick this up, and I'm like, hey, Libby, can I borrow this? And I'm starting to read Atlantis. I think it's a series called Atlantis Rising. And this is the kind of stuff I was really interested in. But I wasn't doing this research yet. I was just getting prepared, I think. And I started watching megalithomania conferences for the first time in 2011. And watching great researchers, a lot of earth energy dowsers, and their research. Michael Tellinger was part of that, Klaus Dona. Hugh Newman is the organizer of that, and he's a great researcher in his own right. So I'm watching all of this stuff, and it's like, okay, I'm seeing all these different things in different parts of the world that are the same. And I feel like I stood on their shoulders when I started doing my own original research, because without that preparation and other things, it wouldn't have happened. And I also took a Flower of Life workshop when I lived in Fairbanks around 2007, and that taught me about sacred geometry. So my key finding, and it's kind of hard to see it here.
Yeah, you can share your screen too if you have things that you want to share as well. So
I'm just going to pull this. This is
absolutely no problem. Just so you know, as we go along.
Okay. So my key finding was a sacred geometric figure called a star tetrahedron, but it's also known as the Star of David.
Are you telling me there's like a star fort looking thing over the United States of America?
it's called a star tetrahedron,
Yes.
the Star of David, and I got that by connecting major cities.
That's amazing. You're going to have to tell us how you did that. That's fascinating. I've never seen that, Michelle, and the implications I can feel that there's huge implications for that.
There are. And what I believe is that this is the key of the Earth's grid system, and it was based on sacred geometry, and that human consciousness was at a much higher level. And what I'll get into is I believe that evil came in, found a way in, took over the grid system, took over our consciousness, and brought us to the world that we live in today.
Now, do we want to be on those lines, or do we not want to be on those lines?
You know, that's a good question. What I believe was the original grid system based on sacred geometry was life enhancing.
Okay.
I believe that the controllers reverse engineered it and turned the original buildings of this grid system into control.
Now, is that on your website, which I think is piercingtheveilofillusion.com, right? Is that drawing, or is that available on your website?
It is. It's in different places.
Okay, piercingtheveilofillusion.com, and it's not one of these fancy flowery websites. It is just jam-packed with information.
My total comfort zone is writing and researching. Speaking is an extra effort for me, but I realized when I got the information that I needed to utilize every avenue of expression. So I've gotten more comfortable with it over time. But I'm very intuitive, and when I write, it just flows. So I've got a lot of
automatic writing, do you think?
Not really.
Okay.
But what I feel is like I get when I'm doing the research, because I've actually been doing the research and writing for about 3 years now. I had been gathering information for several years before that. So I found the Star of David in 2016. And when I had moved to Oklahoma from Alaska in 2012, and this was to help with my mom, I was awake by that time. And I was already, even before I moved, I was really interested in going to places like Spiro Mounds, which is in eastern Oklahoma near Arkansas.
And is that a worthy trip? Is that something I'm in Kansas, so not too far. Is that something I should plan?
You know, it's probably one of the better museums as far as artifacts go, because a lot of these mound sites don't have the artifacts. The ones at Spiro Mounds aren't the originals, but they're replicas, and they're decent, but the story is still the same.
Excellent.
And the problem is they don't want to talk about who was here originally.
Right. And
so they tend to talk about the advanced civilization like they're wearing loincloths, and they're building this astronomically aligned mound complexes in loincloths, one basketful of dirt at a time. And that story is repeated everywhere you go. And so the stories that they tell to explain how things came into existence are flimsy at best, but that's all we know. So that's what we believe.
Right.
And that goes for every museum and, every situation. We've been given a false historical narrative, and I go into that in my website. But I think opportunistic beings came in with evil intent. I think they caused a cataclysm, and that would be the mud flood, and wiped out this original civilization and dug out enough infrastructure to restart civilization and gave us the narrative that we were taught from cradle to grave. So we don't know about this original civilization, even though it's all around us. And I think it was done for power and control.
Now, Michelle, would you speculate that this would be a terrestrial or an extraterrestrial group?
I believe primarily extraterrestrial, but they incarnated in human form.
Okay.
So I think there's both involved.
Interesting. Please continue. This is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's supposed to be a law of non-interference, but that's been circumvented, and they've managed to get away with it by the way that they did this. And because we don't know we're being lied to, we tacitly agree to it, even though we're not consciously agreeing to it because we don't know. So you talk
Michelle,
about movies, you talk about books, you talk about everything. That's what we're told. And
do you think that's one of the reasons for the so-called Easter eggs and things they drop in movies and books, so they can basically say that they have plausible deniability? We told these people very plainly it's not our fault they didn't listen.
Right. That's a big part of it. There's been a lot of research done on predictive programming in the movie Back to the Future.
Mm.
And you can find examples on YouTube of people that have researched the imagery in depth in Back to the Future. And, references to 9/11 and, all kinds of stuff. So that's how they tell us. That's how they meet that requirement. But nobody that I know ever goes to a movie like that thinking they're being told something.
It's brilliant. It is diabolically brilliant what they have done and are continuing to do. And I'm very thankful for researchers like you that are stepping to the fore and opening our eyes to this chicanery and malfeasance that's being perpetrated upon us.
To this day, to this minute.
This second. You're so right.
There's a nice word called gaslighting.
Ooh, can you explain what that means to our viewers? We hear it a lot, but I don't know if anybody really has a good firm on the good grasp on the definition.
It's when you're being unabashedly lied to for maximum psychological effect.
Great explanation.
And that's what's taken place. You may have heard of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Yes. Several of them have been seen carrying it around, haven't they?
Play by play.
Yep. Another Easter egg, if you will, another tell to us.
Yeah. So I do believe that humanity was at a much higher level of consciousness before this event took place. It might have been a series of events. There's a lot of good mud flood researchers on YouTube. This community is growing, not only of people like myself that didn't do this before 3 years ago, but it's also people that are interested in finding out the information.
Absolutely.
And it's just the stories that they tell about how buildings came into existence, for example, don't match the masonry. And a lot of the beautiful old buildings get torn down at the drop of a hat. I mean, we've lost so many of them, but a lot of them are still in use. So you have to think about schools like high schools and junior high schools in different places, museums and theaters, old theaters, banks that look like Greek temples, and they're all over the place. Government buildings, and all the domed buildings. That's part of this original civilization, and I believe it was all functional architecture. So it was all part of this free energy generating system that kept everything in balance and harmony, and that we were in balance as a civilization and as a human community. It was all the same civilization. It was all over the world. So when we talk about Tartaria was in Asia, and I believe that term became popularized because people that first started talking about Tartaria were from that part of the world. But there were R's all over the place. So Barbaria was Northern Africa. And I live in Arizona.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that.
And I've made connections between the Grand Canyon of Arizona and the Grand Canyon in China. I think it's the Flaming Canyon or something like that in China, but it's the same kind of variegated colors.
Wow.
We weren't wondering where we came from or who we were. Very advanced technology. And and we have amnesia. A big
You know,
bump
one
in
of
our head.
your, I'm sorry, we have just a tiny bit of a delay, and I don't mean to speak over you, but one of your articles I looked at today, the whitewashing of Europe, and one of maybe the greatest trick that they played on us is to make us forget who we are.
They've been using race and religion to divide us, and they're starting to flip the narrative. So whereas before they wiped out the original builders of civilization, which I believe were the Moors.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say Moor, it goes back to Lemuria. It goes back to ancient Mu. And I think it was a continuous civilization from ancient Mu on up through Atlantis, on up through almost the present day. And that the evil ones that did this figured out a way to hijack the timeline and take over everything. When you think about the 13 families and all the big names in industry and business, back the last couple hundred years, the DuPonts, the
Right.
Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, they were all part of this bringing in the new narrative, and they just sucked the wealth of the world, and they've stolen a lot.
Now, Michelle, are you saying that they were able to basically jack the timeline and wipe our memories?
I believe so.
This is so fascinating, and as you speak, it resonates so true with me. And I've had people that came on and said they were talking about this subject before, but I'm just blown away by the depth and the just the truth of and the veracity of what you're saying. And I just, please keep going. I'm enraptured, and I think so is our audience. And to think that they have done this to us, and I think some of us are beginning to realize it with help from great researchers like yourself.
Yeah, I do have a lot of information on my website. I have to apologize. I went from a business plan on WordPress because I wasn't using it to its full potential, and I went back to the basic plan, and I lost a bunch of pictures. So I'm still going back through to putting that in there, but there's still a lot that are there, and there's a lot that's written. And then there's my YouTube channel, which you just type in Michelle Gibson and MOORS after that, and then it pops right up. And everything that I write in my blogs, in my blog posts, I turn into a video. And so it's the same information. And it is very detailed. And it's the research for it's taken me deeper and deeper, and places I never even imagined. And it's like this truth wants to come back out. Whether it's the work I'm doing or whether it's the work other people are doing, I think people are looking for answers, realize that something's wrong. And I will say something is very wrong. And I do know the worst of it, and I don't talk about that. But, I think humanity is in grave danger, and we have to wake up. We have to wake up. I mean, if I knew the information that I'm sharing and I didn't share it, I don't feel like I could live with myself.
Michelle, I feel the exact same way. And people say, Jeff, why don't you just entertain? Why don't you just be nice? Why don't you stay away from the things? We just had a 52,000 subscriber YouTube channel shut down. But Michelle, I know exactly what you're saying. If we don't, people like us, if we don't share this information, we literally couldn't sleep. We couldn't eat. We couldn't live with ourselves. So I salute you for being a true researcher. And we need way more like you, Michelle. And I hope that you're just getting started. I'm glad you had your move. You're in Sedona. You got all the great energy. So we're expecting you to work, and get us more and more information.
Well, I have been. It's been pretty driven to do this, but the synchronicities since I came to Sedona have been off the charts. And it might have happened without being here, but it definitely happened being here. And the people that I've met and the experiences that I've had that allowed me to get started doing this. I knew that I wanted to share it, but I didn't, before I started blogging, I didn't know how I was going to be able to show people what I was seeing when I started to put things together. And part of that was cracking the cover-up code of how they hide this. So they call man-made structures natural features. I mean, I live in the red rocks of Sedona, and I look around and I see ancient infrastructure. But most people aren't there, and you talk about that, and they said, have you talked to a geologist? And, I'm just pretty sure that the ancients were such great builders that they knew exactly what they were doing, and, again, put things in precise places and terraformed the earth, and we were way more advanced.
And Michelle, I've just driven through Sedona. We spent about the better part of a day there, and just listening to you speak, and I began to look from that time, I began to look at things differently. And I'm not saying everything that everybody says is true, but you start looking at like the Devil's Tower out there in Wyoming with much different eyes. You start looking at some of these formations, and you're thinking, you know what? Maybe we're not crazy, because and we're getting ready to go up to the Devil's Tower, and isn't it interesting that we call it the Devil's Tower to try to scare us away from it? But it's just, there's so much that we don't know. And let me ask you this question, because a very smart man, who's a very good friend of mine, said to me something like, I like the Tartaria subject, but what difference does it really make to me today? If he had asked you that question, what would you have answered?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Someone's saying this Tartaria is very interesting, but what difference does it really make to us today?
It makes a lot of difference because we were so much more capable. And, now, you look at the beautiful masonry just in the picture that you have on the screen. And, with the spires, like a temple, you can kind of see the upper part of it. Those were all functional things on this original grid system. And, we knew exactly where we were on the planet. It was a beautiful grid system. And if you look on up Carl Monk, and he does have some videos on YouTube. He's a mathematician, and he wrote a book called The Code, and then he did a series of videos about it. And it's really dry, but he shows how sacred sites and temples have their coordinates on the earth encoded in their dimensions. And so he called it a pyramid code. And this grid system was based on that and based on geometry, and it was perfect. Everything was perfect. And we weren't at this seriously low level of consciousness we are today. Where people are kind of stuck in survival, or fighting each other because of race and religion, and that's all been manipulated. It's all been manipulated. The issue with the opiates and the drugs, that's to lower our consciousness. And drinks, alcohol, all of our addictions are geared to that, so that we stay at a lower level of consciousness and don't wake up. So we stay in this constant negative emotional state, and don't look at the causes of it, which are outside of ourselves, because I believe humanity is good.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
The human beings are good, and that we would not be at each other like this if we weren't being manipulated. And I think a lot of the other things going on are part of an agenda as well. To keep us confused. A lot of the gender stuff that's going on. Especially with involving younger kids.
Yes.
You know, and that agenda being pushed there. That's not for our benefit.
And thank you for being a true professional. The way you worded that and got the information across and did it with great finesse. Thank you.
You're welcome. And, you know, so there's just, I really believe we're going to have a better future than what was planned for us. It's really tough right now. I've been awake since, I just need to clarify something really quick, because unfortunately there was a situation involving Melon Veritas.
Yes.
I was not the person that gave him the copyright strike. I was the one that he was interviewing when it came up.
Right.
And if you look at the video where he announced that, he didn't name the person's name in that, but he does mention the person's name in the description, and he also talks about it in a thread.
Yes.
And I just want to clarify that because I found out about it because somebody left me a comment thinking it was me, and I'm seeing that in the comment thread. And I just want to be very clear that I did not do that.
Absolutely. And if I see it again, this person will not be able to be on this channel anymore. So don't do it again, dummy.
I would not do that. And
right.
So I have great respect for Mel, and I think he's doing wonderful work. And it was unfortunate that it came up. It was in an interview with me, so I think that was why my name probably came up in that. But I was not the person that did that.
Absolutely. I understand that. You know, Scott is asking in the chat room, and I don't know where you're going with this, but he asked, whoops, can you explain what Tartaria was and what happened to it?
Okay. So I believe that the original civilization was empires within empire, and they weren't fighting each other as we've been taught. They were integrated, but Tartaria would have been Asia. Barbaria was Africa. The Washita Empire was in North America. You have the better known empires in South America, the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, the Persians in what's Iran today, the Mughal Empire in India. Everything that we know about history has just been fragmented and rewritten.
Absolutely.
And researchers, I first encountered some information from Sylvie Ivanova on New Earth Channel, for any who may be familiar with her. And she talked about, it was through her that I heard about, bear with me.
Sure, take your time.
It's a Russian mathematician, and his name is escaping me right now, but he's the mathematician that's done a lot of research to mathematically prove that the timelines are wrong, that they don't match.
Is he the one that wrote that series of 4 or 5 books?
Yeah.
And I can't remember his name either.
History, science, or fiction, and it's just
right.
It's right gone. Now.
Is it Velikovsky? Is that right?
It's not Velikovsky.
No,
it's
yeah. Both of us blanked it. That's funny.
Yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, she talked about 2 Jesuits.
Imagine that.
Gallagher and Patel, or Patavius, Joseph Scaliger.
Forminko, Anatoly Forminko.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I think they based the new history on original history, and then they just took liberties with details and things like that. So they didn't write a new history from scratch. They just took from, whatever was available. And it might have been more than just those 2, but Scaliger is called the father of modern chronology.
He is. And they're not too terribly creative, are they, Michelle? That's why they tend to copy, and they're like Pete and repeat.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you really look at the details of what we're told about what's here, and not just Scaliger and Petavius or Petau. It's the same person. But in how they frame the narrative, they tell us on one hand that we have this really low technology, and then on another level, there are these massive palatial buildings that we're told were being built at the same time. So Greco-Roman architecture being built in the early 19th century or mid 19th century. And then if you even look at it the slightest bit, it starts to fall apart.
It does. And I can see your military intelligence background coming out. You're methodical, point by point, dispassionate, just the facts, ma'am. Joe Friday. Some of us are old enough to remember Joe Friday. We're almost exactly the same age, by the way. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I married a retired Army sergeant, and he used to tell me he was glad I got out of his Army. So
yeah. Well, I wasn't in the military, Michelle, but I did spend 7 years in the Air Force. So I think you'll appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And my parents were never happy about it, but had I not joined the Army, I would have stayed in a very stagnant place.
And I was in Frankfurt, Germany, and I was over there for 4 years. I had the Eurail pass. I went everywhere. And if we could just get some of our American friends to leave America and go see other places and look at other things. I remember 2:00 in the morning walking through Auringen, Germany, on the cobblestone streets and looking around and thinking, and I wasn't even close to aware yet, everything here is 4 or 5 times older than anything in America. And I was just in awe. And you got to get out and travel the world there. And it's no coincidence, Michelle, that they're trying to make it as hard as they can to keep as hard as they can for us to travel, because we learn so much when we travel and get exposed to other cultures. We find out that we're much more alike than different, and there's no reason to be fighting each other. There's every reason to be joining together to fight the real enemies of humanity.
What comes to mind when you mentioned that about Germany and cobblestones is one morning, and I'm not really sure where I was because I usually wasn't up early in the morning, but it had been raining. I was on my bicycle, and my bicycle tire got stuck in one of those
I've done that.
tracks. And so I just flopped over, and I was just laying there, and this elderly lady was, my God, and she came over and she helped me up right before a streetcar came by. So
amazing. But the good thing is, Michelle, you fell on the street in Germany, so you didn't get dirty. It was probably swept and hosed and perfectly clean.
Yeah, it's really great to live in different countries and experience just different cultures.
And you see these ladies 70, 80 and more walking up these super steep hills and carrying their stuff, and they're just trucking on. It's you've got to go and see Europe, and Germany especially I really loved, and the people in Italy I think were the nicest over there. And we just got to get ourselves out of our comfort zone and out of our paradigm and learn more. And that's why your work is so important, Michelle. And I'll hush now and let you continue on, because we don't want to keep you too long. I know that it's getting around your bedtime, and we're really appreciative. And we can always have you back, I hope, so we don't have to do everything tonight.
It's 8:45. It's not my bedtime yet, but it's gotten dark out there.
Right, it has. I see that in the window.
Yeah, and I went to Peru a couple of years ago, and I saw the same thing in Cusco, where the streets are like that, and you see elderly people with these huge loads on their backs going up and down these steep slants.
And we can't get off the couch and put down the video game controller.
Yeah, and there was a lot of joy. I saw a lot of joy in the people there. It was really humbling.
And though, as you say that, Michelle, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you off track again, but I remember that joy when you would walk into a store, and if you said to them, "Do you speak English?" 9, they didn't want to have anything to do with you. But if you walked in there and gave an effort and tried to actually speak some German to them, they would instantly begin to be very helpful, very kind, probably because they didn't want you butchering the German anymore, but they would really help you out. And that's a lesson to contextualize yourself and be respectful and courteous of people's cultures and ways, and try being service to self, or service to others rather than service to self all the time. You might get a little bit further.
Yeah. I definitely experienced that. And you said I was there from 83 to 85. So a different world back then.
We were there at the same time. It's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, it's very doubtful that I would have made the same decision to go into the military, especially after 2001. But
right.
Back in the 80s, it was a logical, reasonable choice to make.
It was. I don't regret it for a minute.
Yeah. And it helped set the course for my life. So I would have stayed stagnated and probably miserable because I have a family system that wants to pull me in. And I've kind of always wanted to do my own thing.
Right.
And so there's just been this come back.
Yep.
And I'm like, no.
Well, we hope that you keep blazing the trail that you're on, because it's one that needs to be blazed. And there's many people like me that don't have the time or the expertise to dig out these facts that you are. And we need people like you to share them with us.
Thank you. One point that I want to make is, why go through all the trouble? Why go through all the trouble of creating a cataclysm and wiping covering everything in mud, and then digging out, restarting civilization, and giving us a new narrative? Why would they do that?
Great point.
And what I've come to believe is that they needed to do it because we're in a free will place, plane or planet. It doesn't drive my work. I've followed cities and places in alignment. I have found evidence to support a manipulation of our perception of space-time.
Powerful.
In the idea of when globes came into being, which would have been with Mercator.
Yes.
Gerardus Mercator. And ley lines started to disappear from the maps about that same time.
Isn't that fascinating? My friend David Weiss would love to hear that, and I'm sure he probably knows. We'll have to share that with him at some point.
I tend to fall back on sacred geometry and the idea of the shape of a torus. And then that's kind of where I end up landing, is it's a toroidal shape as opposed to flat or sphere.
Right. There's one thing that's certain, is it's not what we're being told.
Right.
Excellent work, Michelle. Thank you. Please continue.
And so they had to do all of this so that we would agree to this. And the only way that we can agree to it is if they lie to us, because we would not agree to it if we knew what was really going on. And I don't think so. I think we've been going through some pretty serious mind control programming, dumbing down with fluoride and poisons, toxins.
Is that why so many people are willing to accept so much of that stuff now, because they're under this mind control and this degradation? That's a great way to look at it.
Got some very smart people in my family, and
me too, Michelle. Me too. You just can't figure it out.
They don't see it, so I don't go there.
Well, yeah, we can't. And especially on YouTube, we're trying to stay here as long as we can.
Yeah. And the information I have to share, people really need to be ready for it, and for the people that are awake and want to share it, my advice is just wait for somebody to ask the questions, because it's just going to cause more pain and dissonance to try to, share it with people that aren't ready for it yet.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I have one family member that I've talked to about it, and I don't even go into it too much with him, because it's completely different from what he thinks and believes about the world. So
absolutely. Tracy, I can't ban that person. Would you please hide them from the channel permanently? Thank you. I appreciate it.
So it's just one of those situations where people do need to be ready for it. But, thankfully with alternative media and, people doing their own research, starting to ask questions, wanting to know information, it is spreading. And that's basically, how it's going to happen. If you've heard of the 100th monkey effect.
I have.
And David Hawkins' power versus force.
Absolutely. I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah. So
all great works.
So the idea that not everybody has to wake up, but one person operating at a higher level of consciousness, and this is power versus force, Dr. David Hawkins, will bring up the vibratory rate of more people, like an exponential number.
Absolutely.
And he talks about, the higher states being love and the lower states being fear, and, like about 10 designations in between.
Absolutely.
And then the 100th monkey idea is that based on a study that was done of Japanese monkeys, that when there were potatoes left, one of them started to clean it, and then another one, and pretty soon all the monkeys were cleaning the potatoes.
And the fascinating thing to me about that, Michelle, is that there were monkeys that were separated by many, many miles of ocean, and they couldn't have taught the other monkeys. Monkeys can't swim that far. So somehow it was transmitted across time and I guess maybe space that these monkeys somehow telepathically gave information to other monkeys.
Right. And I think the same principles affect with, the idea of the morphogenetic field and the collective consciousness. I believe this grid system is part of that. I've heard that before, that the Earth grid system is part of our consciousness grid. And they have done a lot of atrocities at important points on this grid. And that has lowered our collective consciousness as well.
It has. It has. And, that story seems so silly, but you think about it, airplane dropping sweet potatoes to monkeys, they fall on sand. And you can imagine trying to eat a sweet potato that's covered with sand, not going to be a very pleasant experience. But now take that sweet potato, wash it in the salt water, and you've got a whole different experience. So it's just a simple, silly little story, but in fact, very, very profound. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really optimistic. I mean, I think there's a lot of really positive things working for our advantage right now. I think what we have to be aware of, instead of getting caught up in the distractions that we've been given, to realize that the goal of this takeover was to take over our consciousness. And that's where transhumanism comes in.
Yes.
And they have been very advanced in their plans. And it's, taking away our sovereignty and interfacing us with machines. And, this is a very real issue. And so it's really important for us to come together united, because they can't touch us. Again, that's why they've gone through all this trouble to kind of rig a system where we're enslaved without even knowing it. I mean, if you know anything about birth certificates being on bond paper, stock and bond paper, and our birth certificates are traded on the stock exchange. I mean, the controllers literally see us as stock.
Michelle, I have been so not sold on that whole concept, and to hear you say it just lets me know that I need to look at it, and perhaps you can come back sometime and go through that whole concept with us, because I've been don't go there, don't want to hear la 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 la.
I don't want to say it.
I know.
I don't. I mean, I don't want this to be the world we live in and the fate that we're looking at. But look at what's going on today. And that's one of the things about this awakening, is when you look at the craziness, the outright craziness of what's playing out in the world today. It's part of a bigger goal on the part of these people that have been in control for so long. and not for our benefit.
Not at all.
They want total control over our lives.
Now, before we take some calls, what can we, and this was a question on the chat room, what can we individually do and begin to do right now to help turn this thing around?
I guess the main thing is don't believe everything you hear. You know, in terms of what's going on, you don't have to believe me. I'm just putting out there what I've come to have a sense of.
Yes.
And again, it wasn't an overnight thing. This whole research and everything else has been a long, lifelong process for me. 10 years ago, I didn't even think conspiracy theories were even possible. And now I'm like, okay, there's something to this. There's something very bad, very wrong with what's going on here. Our lives aren't supposed to be like this. You know, life is supposed to be beautiful. It's not supposed to be filled with pain and suffering. And I'm not saying that to be Pollyanna.
Right.
You know, my understanding of universal law, you know, is what's happened here is just flipped the script entirely. And
it hasn't been that way in the past, has it? That's what they're hiding from us. We have had a beautiful, glorious, powerful, harmonious, love-based past.
I absolutely believe that. We weren't like this before.
Let me read something that Scheme Team said, and this I think is very important. And he's looks like a very handsome black man. He says that they have BLM supporters in neighborhoods that are 99.9% white with no black people in sight. He says I'm half black, and that's hilarious to me. It's a microcosm of the division that they're trying to foster upon us.
Right.
Thank you, Scheme Team.
And it's to keep us from looking at what they're doing.
Exactly.
And what they're doing is gazillion times worse.
Yes, it is.
You know, human trafficking and worse.
And worse. Absolutely.
And worse.
If you have a question for Michelle, I've opened up the phone lines. We do ask you to be polite. We ask that you be interesting. And don't even push me, because I will bring the hammer down. It's 913-279-0831, 913-279-0831 if you'd like to call. Michelle, please press on for can we do maybe another 15 minutes?
Sure.
Excellent.
Absolutely. I know you're fine. You're fine.
Excellent. So where do we go next with this? I mean, I had kind of had that thought in my mind of, you know, what's the practicality of this? You've now shown me exactly how practical and really how almost imperative this subject is. Where do we go from here? And what do you think those of us that are just beginning to wrap our mind around the subject need to hear? And Cynthia's asked me 3 or 4 times, and I don't even know what this really means. She keeps asking me, what about all the babies in the incubators at the World Fairs?
Yep. They were called infantoriums.
Infantoriums.
And I honestly think it was a precursor to Planned Parenthood.
Oh.
But let me go ahead and share the screen.
Okay.
I'll cover orphan trains, and then I'll cover infantoriums.
Okay, perfect. Just hit down there in the middle. It says share, and then I'll have to hit it on my end too. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. I hit share, so
Yep,
I think
you're ready.
I think I'm there. Okay.
Let's take this one call real quick, and then we'll get into this. Okay.
Sure.
It's Late Night in the Heartland. You're live with Jeffrey Daugherty.
Hey, thanks. I love your show. And I don't even want to be asking this question, but Michelle, do you know about the 29 about folks that have been killed in the last 30 days by black people? And do you have any comment on what people should do from this point?
Let's go ahead and end that one. I don't know if we want to tackle that or not.
I think I'll say it's being manipulated.
It is.
It's being manipulated. There are very evil people with money that are paying this to happen.
Absolutely.
And the same thing happened 300 years ago, but it was reverse.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's the issue is that they're trying to divide us. They're trying to frighten us. They're using violence, and violence is very effective. I really think we're in that murky in between time before things start to get better.
They are.
I was hoping it would be sooner than this, but apparently it's not. And that's troubling to me, but I have to hold on to my belief that at the end of the day, things are going to be better. I
agree. And caller, I wasn't shutting you down. We just have to be very careful on YouTube. I think that we're on the same page with that. And Michelle, I appreciate your answer. I think it's very, very thoughtful and communicates again with great tact. So let's go ahead, and I've shared the screen. Is that what you wanted to share? That doesn't look like what you wanted to share.
No, I'll put it up here.
There we go.
This is what I wanted to share. And I did some extensive research into charitable organizations, orphan trains, orphanages, immigration, infantoriums in the 19th century. And I think that was the time that this whole reset was taking place and the new historical narrative was being started. And the gist of it is starting around 1830 was when things started to really happen. 1850, 1851, I think, was the official kickoff of the new world order timeline. And I believe that was the Crystal Palace exhibition in London was their official howdy-do, showing all this wonderful technology that wasn't theirs, but they claimed. And the 19th century was a very busy time. And one of the things that happened was that there was an explosion of orphans, parentless children. So, let's say there was a mud flood. Either there were, the children were, there were nurseries or something for kids, or the parents were drinking because they had distilleries and breweries pop up all over the place about the same time. But again, they were lowering human consciousness. They were creating conditions of poverty. And they had to do something with all of these kids. And so one solution was putting them in orphanages and asylums. And then this idea of the orphan trains came up. And so I had this example of the New York Juvenile Asylum. Sent an estimated 6,000 children out west between September of 1854 until 1923. And was.
So were these true orphans, no parents? Were their parents killed?
That's a good question. I really don't know.
Okay.
But they had all of these kids. They had all of these poor people that they had to do something with.
I mean, were they giving their kids away? Were they selling their kids? Was it going back to what we were talking about with the horrible things? Did that start then?
I think it did, and I'll go into that here in just a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll hush and let you go.
No, I was just going to say, because the orphan trains I think was an early form of industrial child trafficking.
Oh, that is so profound.
And I'll go over why I say that.
Okay.
So anyway, I was looking at the New York Juvenile Asylum and its origins, and then the orphan train movement was started by Charles Loring Brace. Again, I'm a social work major, so when I'm doing all this research, I mean, this is exactly the stuff I learned in college. This version of it, the early attitudes about poverty and so forth. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We get the version, the victor's version of history.
We do.
They get to write it. So anyway, Charles Loring Brace started this New York Children's Aid Society, and the program was called Placing Out, and a function of the Children Aid Society Immigration Department. So the first one was the first orphan train was sending children to a place called Duigiac in Michigan.
Now,
And
Michelle, are these just what they sound like? Trains full of orphans?
that would be the indication.
Interesting.
Again, this is what's findable on the internet. It's everything is subject to question, but this is the thread that I was able to pull out when I started looking into it. So apparently 37 of the 46 children were able to find adoptive homes in Duigiac. And based on that success rate, they decided to move forward with the program.
One shudders to think of where those homes were and what they were getting into. Wow.
Exactly. And so, this is the guy that founded it.
Oh my.
And then, what we're told is the vision was opening up the American West for settlement and immigrating these children to live with Western farming families. So that's the story that we're told. And people like Charlotte Augusta Gibbs, the wife of John Jacob Astor III, was a supporter of this.
Of course she was.
Okay. So again, you have these elites trying to find something to do with these kids. You would think. Right. But I do think there's probably something deeper than that.
I would agree with you. And here's the famous families.
Mm-hmm.
And look at some of those names, like Bundy jumps off the page, and we can get into a whole different thing of manufactured events and stuff, but we're not going to.
Right. So, but I think this is very real. They want us to think we're tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists to even entertain the idea, but that's just them trying to deflect from them.
Absolutely. And Michelle, you would probably look really good in a tinfoil hat, by the way.
Well, thank you. I'm sure you would too.
Absolutely.
I'm going to have to get one. Maybe a Budweiser one.
There you go.
So anyway, you've got kids everywhere.
Look at
so
that.
this is Glasgow in Scotland, and you have the same thing going on the other side of the pond that you do over here with all of these kids. So there were supposed to be somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 homeless children in New York City by 1850, which was said to have a population of about 500,000 at the time. So again, 1850 to me is the beginning of this new timeline.
Yep.
Okay.
1850, beginning of the new timeline.
That it's officially begun.
Yep.
Lots of stuff going on before and after that year, and 1851 too. Okay. So you've got
Does
this
the
going
Civil
on.
War tie into this? The American Civil War, Lincoln's War?
I'm doing something right now, doing some research on Civil War anomalies, and so I'll have some information coming forward about that here shortly.
Well, if you want to break it, let us know. We'd be glad to host you.
Okay. I mean, I would be happy to. I've encountered some really questionable information in my research about Civil War dates and things that were said that had been built then. And so I have a lot of questions, and have this opportunity right now researching sanitary fairs, which one of my viewers let me know about. She had stumbled across them, and it's like a gold mine of information. So I'm working on that.
Sanitary fairs?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were like a smaller version of World Fairs expositions and exhibitions, but it was the same idea. And they were in support of a private agency that was created by federal legislation called the U.S. Sanitary Commission that was supposed to be in existence to raise money for wounded soldiers during the Civil War. But they were lavish affairs in this spectacular architecture. So I'm working on that. I hope to have that done by the weekend.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that.
I'm in the middle of, I move on Wednesday next week to another place here in Sedona. And so I've been caught up in stuff related to that for the last couple of weeks. So I haven't had the time that I normally have to put into it, but I've been working a little bit on it every day.
Michelle, is it ridiculous to think that there might be an artificial number of years added to or taken away from what we're given as history?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's out of the question.
Okay.
I think there's good reason to suspect that.
Gotcha.
And one thing is that a lot of dates that are on like older buildings, you'll see like a very bold, let's say 915,
Exactly.
and then you'll see a barely visible 1 in front of the
Right.
9. You know, so it really looks like it was added at a different time.
Maps, photographs, paintings, coins.
Yeah. So anyway, the orphan train movement got going, and you had these committees in these communities that had to arrange a place for the adoptions, and they would go to theaters or whatnot whenever they ended up in the towns that they were going to.
Who built the railroads, Michelle? Who was mainly responsible?
I think it was the original civilization.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I've really gone into depth about that.
Yep.
And I mean all rail infrastructure, the railroads, the subways, the streetcars.
Amazing.
It's incredibly sophisticated. And again, the story they tell us about how they came into existence just doesn't add up. And there's a lot of like subway tunnels that just aren't used anymore. There used to be streetcar lines everywhere, and in most places they aren't in existence anymore, and the tracks have been torn out of the ground.
Amazing.
And you know, we're just, if you look at pictures of different cities, you'll see pictures of trolley cars back in the day.
Yeah.
But as soon as cars came in and became readily available, they went away.
Mm.
So there's this, whatever came in and took over everything really doesn't want us to know about all this stuff. So, you know, with the orphan trains, there wasn't any real vetting of the families. They were placed in the homes for free. They weren't required to adopt them. They were supposed to educate them. And there were many orphan trained children that went to live with families that placed orders.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could go wrong? You know, I've heard that happening today.
Mm.
I don't know about you guys, but you know, there's this culture that exists side by side with ours that is focused on this kind of stuff.
It is.
So they would go on stage and, you know, be paraded in front of strangers, and that was the orphan train movement, and it lasted for a long time.
Michelle, you've hit, I mean, it just all adds up and all makes sense.
You know, so that's, you know, so was the orphan train movement a means to populate the country with parentless children with no history and no sense of connection to wherever and with whomever they landed? Or was it the beginning of organized industrial skill trafficking of children by the elite?
And they, you know, even us that are supposed to know, we think it's a new thing, but it's not a new thing.
Yeah. And I'm just going to go down here.
Please.
Again, I apologize. The pictures are important to my blog, and I lost some. So it's going to take me a while to go back through a lot of this stuff.
Oliver Twist was being mentioned in the chat room when I saw Oliver Twist go by. Les Miserables.
Mm-hmm. What are they about? I mean, there's a lot of orphans in these stories.
And you start getting into the use of orphans within MK Ultra mind control and other nefarious type things. It's, boy, you start connecting the dots and you get a bigger picture, don't you?
Yeah. And Les Miserables especially, you know, but in terms of my life experience contributing to my ability to do this, is I read Les Miserables when I was like 13 or 14. I mean, not the complete unabridged version, but, you know, a condensed version. So I already had the story in my head when I started doing the research for this, and it started to make sense. It's like, where did all of these orphans come from? Why are they always talking about orphans? And this is getting into the infantoriums, and this makes no sense. Okay, so starting at the end of the 19th century, these incubators were developed, and then all of a sudden they're being used in these expositions.
Amazing.
So the first one
Let me
was
thank Scott and Bobby G for their donations, their tips on Rockfin.
So starting in the Berlin Exposition in 1896, you have this Martin Cooney, who's supposed to be a medical doctor, but he was more like a showman.
Mm.
And this was Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in London in 1897. You know, you've got these babies in incubators, and there are nurses standing around. And these were called neonatal health care back in the day. And apparently hospitals couldn't provide this service. So, you know, parents took their babies to these sideshows, and it doesn't add up at all. And what happened to the babies? Where did they go after they were the sideshow attraction?
It's so it's unimaginable, but it's real.
And this is all available online. I mean, you can look into this. it's totally available.
It is. Which may be part of the plausible deniability as well, huh?
Right. You know, who's going to go look? So a lot of these places like Coney Island and trolley parks and so forth ended up going up in fire, which is very common. They didn't want them around.
And some call that Yehudan lightning.
And then here's where I think the tie into Planned Parenthood is, because, you know, I don't know, you know, how familiar you or your audience is with the, you know, the whole idea of selling baby parts.
All too
familiar. Heard of it?
No, all too
or at
familiar.
least heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. So at the time that he's shutting down the infantorium in Coney Island was the same time that hang on.
There was an inventorium on Coney Island, right next to the amusement park, no doubt.
Yeah, it was part of the amusement park.
That's just crazy.
Okay. Anyway, it was about the same time that Margaret Sanger was starting Planned Parenthood. Was
Margaret Sanger developed the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, was when the infantorium closed down on Coney Island.
I'm sure that's just a coincidence, Michelle.
And that was in the 1940s. You know, so it's just, you know, just a lot of, I'm going to stop sharing there. Okay. But I mean, just weird stuff in the historical narrative that, you know, they tell us, they said they tell us what they're doing. They tell us the history. But because we haven't been told anything else, and because critical thinking was removed from our education, there was something called the trivium and the quadrivium.
Yes.
And the trivium contained critical thinking. And somebody left me a comment that the trivium was removed in 1851.
Wow.
You know, about the same time this was happening. So they don't want us to think. You know, we're just taught to read information and then regurgitate it.
And we changed from, I am famous for mixing these up, but we went from dialectic to didactic teaching as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, they don't want us to think for ourselves.
They don't
whatsoever. And, you know, again, thank goodness for the internet. Thank goodness for alternative media, because mainstream is propagandized. And a big part of the problem that we're facing today with the gaslighting and everything.
Absolutely.
You know, anymore, I've been so focused on my research because I just can't really stand to follow what's going on. So I just,
you can't,
you know, throw myself into the next thing. But I think that's another part of, when you ask what can we do now, is it will drive you crazy to follow every detail of what's going on. So just do things that you enjoy. Get out in nature, go for a hike, spend time with your family, with your friends. We're going to make it through this. It's probably going to get stranger before it gets better. To me, that's what the indications are. It's going to get stranger before it gets better, but I do think it's going to get better, and sooner rather than later.
I agree too. I have a little saying that says the world is going to be better than it's ever been, sooner than even we can imagine, if we'll just do our part and become active and become aware. And I think that going to tell us your website again. I forgot it already.
So my website is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. And my YouTube channel is Michelle Gibson. And if you type in Moores, it'll come right up. I set up a YouTube channel years before I became a creator. So I didn't make it the same name as my blog, or I would have.
Gotcha. And the YouTube channel is Michelle Gibson,
and just
Moores,
M-O-R-S. Yeah, and that's, I believe that the ancient civilization was a combination of these empires that weren't at odds with each other. And I can give you a really good example of that. I was looking at a place called Leeds Castle in England. It's in southern England, and it's built on an artificial island. It has a star base, and it looks like a castle. And then in Japan, in Nagano, at I think it's Matsumoro Castle or something like that. It's on an artificial island with a star base, and it looks Japanese. But it's the same.
Little thing called the Statue of Liberty is on the same base, isn't it?
And the Statue of Liberty is on a star fort. It's an 11-pointed star fort called Fort Wood, and it's also a lighthouse, which I just found out recently. It was an operational lighthouse from 1886, which is the year that it was supposed to have been inaugurated, to the early 1900s. It functioned as a lighthouse.
Amazing. Yes. Michelle, I can't thank you enough for being with us. As usual, my wife is brilliant and correct. This is one of the great shows that we've had, and I really appreciate you. And it's so important in these days of the lamestream regime media for us to step up. And I so appreciate your approach, because we can't afford to be slipshod. We can't afford to be promoting things and reporting things that we haven't checked and double checked. And I just hope that many people will follow your example and rise our standard of journalism and rise our standard of integrity and become objective, empirical, and checkers and double checkers, and not just run with everything that we hear. You're setting a great example, Michelle. Your military time has served you well, and you've inspired me to redouble my efforts, and I just want to thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I really do appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be bugging you to come back. I'll warn you right now. Okay.
Well, I'll send you my blog post and video on the sanitary fairs as soon as I get it done, so you can check it out.
Please do. Please do.
No, and again, it's information that's available to look up on the internet. So, some of what I say, you can't look it up, but this, you can definitely look it up, and it's right in your face.
Absolutely. Michelle, it's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
And good luck with your move.
Thank you. Just been hectic.
It's always an adventure.
Like I told you with my internet, it's like, I'm not going to ever be proactive with with calling the service provider 2 weeks early.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Gibson, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Gibson, what a great honor, what a great privilege. And you know what? I think that Michelle was so good. I'm going to do something I've never done before. Let's hear it for Michelle Gibson, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, give her a big hand. She deserves it. Michelle Gibson. All right. All right. Wow. That was great. And I like to encourage you to go over to Michelle's YouTube and go ahead and subscribe to her channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Like the video, hate the video, but do something. It does drive us up the, what do we call it, up the algorithm, so we can get more people to hear this organically instead of me driving them to it. And we appreciate you. We really do. And also, if you've noticed in the box below, we did the great show last night with Carlene. Thank you so much. We did the great show last night, and we went through Michael Jackson's Bad video. I'm bad, you know that one. And Shimon. And we did a decode on the lyrics. And if you'd like to learn Michael Jackson's Bad secret, just click on the link in the information box below. It's absolutely free. I'll send it to the email that you provide, and I will send it to the email that you provide. So if you send it to Mickey Mouse at dumbdumb.com, that's where it's going, and you're not going to get it. We're trying to invoke reciprocity. We're trying to give you some value, some added value for participating in these programs, in hopes that we will get reciprocity back. And for us, reciprocity means the opportunity to reach and talk to more people with this message of unindoctrination. Amanda makes a statement that I think Cynthia feels this. I feel this with grandchildren. Amanda says, this world is a scary place. Being a mom, nothing fracks her out more than this scary, creepy world around her child. And parents, please keep your children close and don't give in to fear. Don't give in to dread, but be proactive, be vigilant. And I know with Scott there, the vigilance is covered, and we appreciate both of you and appreciated your help last night very much. Stacy adds, it's time to bring the child out the child leash again. Funny story on that. I used to do stand-up comedy, and I had a friend who was a stand-up comic who was black, and he had a friend that was married to a black lady, and they were going to go to the mall together. This is back when we went to the mall, right? And you remember those things that Stacy's talking about, those child leashes, right? And he brings out his black child, and the child looked black, even though it was a mixed couple. The child looked black, and he comes walking out of the house, white guy with a black kid on a leash, and he's like, no, you are not going to the mall with a black kid on a leash. True story, ladies and gentlemen. He had no ill intention, but not a smart move. Not a smart move. I can't see that going well. I cannot see that going well. Wow. So I'm going to go ahead and open the phone lines back up. I knew we had a limited time with Michelle, so I wanted to make sure that we maximized her opportunity to share with us information. But we will go ahead and open up the phone lines. Don't ask me about Tartaria, because everything I know about Tartaria I just learned from Michelle Gibson. But if you have other questions about the other shows that we've done, the shows that we're doing, if you have suggestions, please hit a brother up. It's Late Night in the Heartland. You're live with Jeffrey Daugherty. Did I miss the button? I guess I did. It's Late Night in the Heartland. You're live with Jeffrey Daugherty.
Hey, Jeff, it's Scott.
Hey, Scott. What's up, my friend?
So, it brought up a thought that I was having when she was talking about the orphans and just kind of showing up. The concept of the NPCs and the fact of, kind of in the Genesis script, how they created more or less the NPCs or the golems. It made me wonder about how many people can be created. Like, we think they have to be born. I mean, that's like an automatic presupposition that we have about this whole thing.
Right.
But what if they just add them?
Are you suggesting that the orphans could have been NPCs?
Yeah. So my thought
Wow.
was that orphans could be NPCs, or even the fact that like you have somebody who comes into town from some other state. I mean, you don't know where they came from.
Right. If they're coming from New
What-
York City, they're going out west. Who knows?
And so what if there's actually the ability to, like, you know, you go simulation theory, instead of having to abide by the rules of people being born, what if it's possible that people are just added, like, you know, numbers added to a screen?
So they just coded them in potentially.
Right. And so that would explain, you know, I know here in Columbus, we have a lot of apartment buildings showing up, and the statistic is something like 60
Scott,
people a day coming in.
You just hit on it, Cynthia. Every time we drive into town, and you know what that means for us since you were here, every time we drive into Overland Park, Cynthia is always remarking, why are they building all these apartments? They're just building and building and building apartments. Wow.
And where are they coming from? And my thought too is like the NPCs, which, you know, talking about a topic we can't really hit up on YouTube,
Right.
You know, the ouchie, if you will. It's like, that's almost like a decision you have to make, good and evil type decision for yourself.
It is.
Accept it or not accept it. And, you know, when you have all the NPCs out there who will accept it because they're controlled, then it creates that pressure and social proof to try to like coerce you into it.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers over on Facebook right now. Thanks for being with us. And I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers on YouTube right now. If you want to hear this call-in discussion moving forward and see the after party, please join us over at Rockfin. Just go to Rockfin, look for the Christian Whistleblower. So, Scott, we